I want to talk to you today about God as a changing reality. Now, the title itself is going to rattle some of you in wondering where I may be going with this. And I am aware that what I am about to talk about is very important, but for some of you is going to potentially upset you a little. May make you wish to respond adversely and negatively. But I would say to you, could that be because the thing that I'm about to talk about is a present and active reality in your own life and understanding? And there's a little portion in the Bible that's not the only one of this nature that I could bring, but I want to bring it to you just to set the scene of what I want to talk to you about. It's found in the Old Testament of the Bible, and it's in 1 Samuel and chapter 15. And this is what it says. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go attack the Amalekites and totally destroy everything that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. So Saul summoned the men and mustered them at Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 men from Judah. And Saul went to the city of Amalek and set an ambush in the ravine. Then he said to the Kenites, go away and leave the Amalekites, so that I do not destroy you along with them, for you showed kindness to all the Israelites when they came up out of Egypt. So the Kenites moved away from the Amalekites. Then Saul attacked the Amalekites all the way from Havilah to Shur, to the east of Egypt. He took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, but all his people he totally destroyed with the sword. Now, these are some of the parts of Bible that preachers and teachers will refer to kind of in passing or to justify something else without actually stopping and considering what the implications are of what we just read. Now, you can call it what you like. And again, I'm not some wet behind the ears greenhorn coming into the church in the last couple of years and starting to read the Bible. And, you know, I'm a lifetime in this. I am, for more than half of my life, in full-time ministry. So I'm not coming at this from, you know, some trouble-causing whippersnapper. I'm coming at this from well inside the structure. And I would say to you, you can call this whatever you like. But if we were to use modern parlance, modern language to talk about this, we would call it genocide. We would call it murder. We would call it ethnic cleansing. Now that troubles me. And there's another verse in the Old Testament, in the last book of the Old Testament, called Malachi. And it's in chapter 3 and verse 6, and it says, I, the Lord, do not change. So you, O descendants of Jacob, are not destroyed. What does that mean? Does it mean that this genocidal, murderous, ethnic cleansing being, who it is claimed gave the instruction for all these actions to be performed, that is who God is, and that he does not and has not and will not change? Then we have a problem, because when we transition into the New Testament of the Bible, we have this guy Paul, who is a Jew, an Israelite, saying things like, in Galatians chapter 3 and verse 28, there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And in Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 14, he says, for he himself is our peace, who has made the two one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility. And because I've said so much about people stopping at the comma, I will say I have stopped at the comma there, and there is more to read, which is interesting reading. And I want you to know you can go ahead and read that. But I'm just wanting to try and show you here that we have some kind of potential conflict emerging, and we have to think about how we interpret this. Now, the study of anthropology gives us insight into the human concepts of God throughout the ages. So, as a very layman's, simplistic, condensed view of this, there are books and books and books about this, but just as a condensed, simplistic summary, let me say this. In anthropology, you look back and you begin in concepts of God with the hunter-gatherers, earliest civilization. And when we were hunter-gatherers, animism was the primary definition of divine presence of God. It was the predominant idea. It was to them a spirit-filled world, and you had to keep the spirits happy. And, because how else could you explain the floods? How could you explain drought? How could you explain locusts and pests and good harvests one year and bad harvests the next year, or plenty of animals to hunt one year and then another year can't find them, successful, unsuccessful. So the predominant idea that grew then of the nature of God was the idea of animism, that everything is controlled by spirits. We were in a spirit-filled world, so spirits in the animals, spirits in the ocean, spirit in the clouds, and we better keep those spirits happy. So we began to develop in that animism a process of rituals designed to please whatever God, to placate usually whatever God, and hopefully incite from them upon yourself the ability to survive. But then as we went from hunter-gatherers and stopped wandering so much, and then began to create farming and caring for herds and flocks, which was agricultural communities. So we moved from hunter-gatherers to agricultural communities when we stopped wandering around, and because of the need for crops being sown and harvests and herds and flocks giving birth to offspring, and and they hopefully being strong and being able to give you good milk and good meat, etc. Fertility became the predominant idea. So we moved from animism to fertility as the predominant idea. And if you look at this in history, you'll find it's the only time in human history that feminine ideas of God emerge, for obvious reasons, because when they got into the realm of fertility, of seed and soil, of birth and growth and harvests, then obviously the feminine idea came in. So you see back in anthropology, as you study this, that it's the time in human history when feminine ideas of God emerged. But then we moved on from hunter-gatherers to agricultural communities to complex communities. Now, complex communities were formed because of increasing population, and now we begin, because of that populace, to have the need to develop militarily and governmentally to protect and to control them. Now, there's a sociology. And with the emergence of complex communities came the need for another kind of God, the warrior God, the sovereign Lord. And this became the predominant idea of God. So now in complex communities we had tribal chieftains because it became necessary, and it wasn't long before tribal chieftains were becoming designated as the divine sons of God. However you perceived the personal nature of God, they became the appointed ones of God. It's that era from where we get the divine right of kings. And for those of you who don't know, one of the edicts that King James gave to the Bible translators when the King James Version of the Bible was being brought to being was that they must do nothing in their translation to undermine the divine right of the king, the divine authority of the king, and the authority of the church. Now, if you therefore think that there is complete purity in that translation process, then you're missing this vital element, that was necessary because they wanted to maintain the divine authority of kings and the divine authority of the church over people. The problem is that now God is seen in that light. The one that emerged from complex communities is the one that really has transitioned through to us now, because in essence we still live in complex communities with tribal chieftains, etc., just on a much larger scale. So in that complex community issue of the warrior God, the sovereign Lord, now God is seen in that light. Power shifts back towards males from the fertility female thing. And God is now seen as the all-powerful, superiorly strong, all-conquering male being above the sky. And within the process of communal development, each people group had their own god or gods, until the idea of the oneness of God began to emerge. And this happened in Hebrew culture as well. We could have a long conversation about that. But the idea of the oneness of God began to emerge, and out of that came the three major monotheistic religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, because of wrestling with the idea of God's not just spirits in different things, and God's not just the fertility process, but there's something powerful about God, and therefore, he because we then understood through the role of tribal chieftains and stuff, now God is mono, okay, supreme ruler, the one. So the three major monotheistic theistic religions took that idea, but each thinking its own understanding is right. Now, today's not the day we debate that issue per se, but I want you to understand this in the context of God as a changing reality. So you need to understand that early Bible, for those of you who are of the same persuasion as myself or were raised in the same background, early Bible takes place, and remember what we read at the beginning about that horrendous act. Early Bible takes place in the tribal phase of human religion. And Christianity has found it difficult to shake this mantle. And what it produces is, if there is a chosen people, then there is a non-chosen people. If there are a people who are accepted, there are are people who are rejected. If there are people who are friends of God, then there are people who are enemies of God. And so out of that, we developed the idea, which is the tribal idea, that has permeated society in its attempt to create within the complexity the authority and the help structures that it longed for, that we can justify anything because God already rejected them. So how I treat them doesn't really matter, because God already rejected them, because they're not chosen and we are. So I want you to stay with the emergence of this mindset, attitude. And then, of course, how that develops. And unfortunately, this is also true in many Christian circle mindsets and many individuals. God hates anybody who the tribe hates. And the tribe hates anybody that they believe God hates. And so it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle from which there's no escape, without ridicule and rejection by the tribe. So if you dare to say, well, God as a changing reality must be considered, then what happens is the tribe will kick back. It will kick back against you, and of course you're in a position then of ridicule and rejection by the tribe, because you must accept the concept that the tribe holds to. Now, for those of you who are thinking, yep, religion, always said religion's the problem, let me throw into this mentality political affiliation. Because that's no different. I'm watching it happen all the time around me, and I've watched it for my whole lifetime, not seeing it as clearly as I have done since I reached a little more mature age in my life. But political mentality, political affiliation has still become ingrained with the tribal mentality. It's become ingrained in the complex community with the tribal idea of a God. Now, you might say, but I don't have a God. I'm atheistic, or I don't believe in God. But all of us have gods. All of us, we can call them anything we wish. And I don't mind you saying, I don't believe in whatever. But we all have gods. We all have supreme things that we give our allegiance, worship, offerings to. And so I want you to understand, for many of you, that this not only reflects in one's perspective and manifestation of religious belief in terms of Christianity, etc. But this same thing permeates society in political affiliation, tribalism, the tribal God, with all the problems that creates, because it's the same. It becomes this self-perpetuating cycle. We hate anybody who our ideological philosophy hates. We are the chosen, they are not the chosen. We are the accepted, they're the rejected. We're the friends of truth, they're the enemies of truth. And so these things infect everything. So throw this mentality into political affiliation, throw it into personal identification, and you still see the tribal thing: gay, straight, transgender, hetero. It's all in there, and that's just the personal identification of the sexual nature of things, but you could put other things into there as well, and social identification: educated, uneducated, rich, poor. I've watched it happen with Brexit. However one perceives or voted in the whole British Brexit thing, to deem that one has the right to call any person who happened to vote Brexit as a fool and a moron is an indicator that we are still governed by the tribal perception of deity. We have a tribal God, whether that God is the European Union or whatever. We have a tribal perception. Now likewise, for anybody to from the other side of the spectrum start throwing stones and calling people who in their understanding felt that they wish to represent that in a different way, you have the same problem, and this does not make for a cohesive, kind, loving society. And we are part of the problem because we are still driven by concepts of God which are tribal in nature. And so it may not be the Christian definition of this that you would hold to, but it's the all-powerful, superiorly strong, all-conquering being. We have to adhere to this tribal chieftain idea, and that tribal chieftain may be a system or a party or a gender or a position. And we replace prejudice with prejudice. So in all of these areas, we would say we don't want the prejudice that those things represent, but then we replace that prejudice with our own prejudice because we have this tribal mentality. See, tribal religion is about justifying your fears and projecting your hatred. And that's about personal security to the particular ethos or whatever that you have adhered. And remember, I'm not just talking about like church things here. Listen to me, hear me, it will help you. Tribal religion identifies enemies. If you are acute at identifying enemies, you are still in the grip of tribal religion, and you will not help your cause, you will just harm others. Tribal religion takes tribal prejudices and sanctifies them with the religious or pious language or woke language. Let me say that again. Tribal religion takes tribal prejudices and sanctifies them with the religious or pious or woke language. But it's still prejudice. The tribal God only cares about the people of the tribe, which means that mostly, give or take a little virtuous posturing, the people of the tribe only really care about the people of the tribe because everybody else is stupid and dumb and out and lost and whatever. The people of the tribe have specific interpretations which create initiation rites as the only way people not of their tribe can be accepted into their tribe. And that's a problem to me. It masquerades as right, as purity, as salvation, when it's rigidly stuck in the ancient mindset and attributes of the tribal God. Unfortunately, it lacks the love that it so dearly claims to have. So are you still wedded to the idea of a tribal God? In your affiliations, in your belief, in your attendance, in your association, in your membership. Jesus said something very interesting. He said, "By their fruits you shall know them." As one man used to say, who I knew very well, it's not by their suits, it's by their fruits. Are you still wedded to the idea of the tribal God in every aspect of life? So how do we get from hating our enemies to loving our enemies? How do we get from plaguing our enemies to praying for our enemies? How do we get from persecuting to blessing? How do we get from condemning to forgiving? How do we get from prejudice to justice for all? That word prejudice is interesting word because it's made up of two Greek words in its root, pre and judice. You may know the word prejudice. Prejudice is about prejudging, not about prejustice. And yet so many who claim to desire prejustice, and by that I mean is justice taken unto the guilty, to the undeserving, to the outcast, to the rejecter, to the opposer, to the enemy. Justice being given to them in order that justice being given to them through love might change them. Most don't live there. Most of us may claim or think we live there, but most of us live in this tribal mindset of prejudging. Tribal mindset makes you prejudge. Tribal mindset can give you nothing but prejudice. Prejudice, and the deeper you go into the tribal concept, the deeper your prejudices will become, and not your justices. But we claim we want justice, but by living in prejudice. I'm speaking this, hear me. So in the light of all this, what really is the Christ-Ian story? Now, this is an interesting question, and I'm gonna wrestle with a little bit next week for you. What is, and the reason I didn't say Christian is because I'm trying to separate the institution called Christian from the revelation, which is the Christ, which is a wonderful revelation for all humanity that breaks this cycle of the tribal God mentality and brings us from that place to a place of love and unity and cohesive connections with a proper understanding of who the divine is, and allows God in his changing reality to humanity. So let me not go on to what I want to say next week. So, what is the real Christ-Ian Christian story? Is institutionalized Christianity guilty of making Jesus the ultimate champion of a violent and vengeful tribal deity instead of the Christ, who is the loving spirit that restores all things? I hope you're hearing me today about not just your religious life, but about your whole life. And I want to go on next week to talk about what really is the Christ-Ian story. What really is the Christ-Ian story? Because it's the one that breaks this cycle and dismantles the mindset of a tribal God, a tribal adherence in every arena of our life, and brings us to the wholeness that can only come from the love that flows in what the Bible calls the Christ Spirit. Hope you can get with me next week as we talk about this, and you'll reflect on what I've talked about today. I love you. I bless you. I'll catch you again next week.